The ocean holds many secrets, but some disappear so completely that even time is afraid to uncover them. In 1917, during the deadliest year of World War I at sea, an American merchant ship set out on what should have been a routine voyage. She was strong, reliable, trusted by her crew, and yet, somewhere in the vast, cold Atlantic, she vanished without a trace. No distress call. No survivors. No wreckage drifting on the waves. Not even a single piece of wood carried to shore. It was as if the SSS Andrea Luckenbach had been swallowed by the ocean in one silent, merciless moment. But what makes this story even more unsettling is not just the disappearance, it's the silence that followed. The US government released no clear explanation. Documents were sealed. Families received vague telegrams with no details, no answers, no truth. And as the war raged on, her name quietly faded into the background until history almost forgot she ever existed. Why would a ship known for its strength vanish so suddenly? Why were officials so hesitant to speak about it? And how did the ocean manage to hide the entire wreck? For more than a century, today we dive deep into a forgotten wartime mystery. A story of courage, danger, secrecy, and loss. A story buried beneath waves, patrolled by submarines, mines, and the terrors of a world at war. A story where every theory raises more questions, and every silence feels deliberate. This is not just the story of a ship. It is the story of 30 men who never returned home, a company left without answers, and an ocean that refuses to reveal the truth. For over 100 years, the Andrea Luckenbach has remained a ghost resting somewhere in the deep, dark waters where war and mystery collide. Today, we finally go looking for her. The ocean has swallowed countless ships, but very few disappear so completely that history forgets their names, and even fewer vanish without a single witness, a single distress signal, or even a trace of debris floating on the waves. But in 1917, during the deadliest year of World War I at sea, one American cargo ship vanished so mysteriously that even the US government refused to talk about it. Her name was SS Andrea Luckenbach. To the outside world, she was just another merchant steamship, steel hull, coal-fired engines, carrying cargo across the Atlantic. But inside naval circles, she was known for something rare during wartime. She was reliable, sturdy, steady, almost impossible to sink. Built at a time when American shipbuilders prided themselves on engineering strength over speed, Andrea Luckenbach had survived storms, mechanical failures, and long voyages without a single major incident. So when she left port in 1917, carrying essential wartime supplies, no one doubted she would reach her destination. Not the crew, not the company, not the US Navy, but the world was changing fast. By 1917, the Atlantic Ocean was no longer water, it was a graveyard. German U-boats patrolled beneath the surface like hungry wolves, sinking ships with ruthless efficiency. Merchant vessels were prime targets, and no ship, no matter how strong, was truly safe. Still, the Andrea Luckenbach was believed to be different. She was well built, carefully maintained, and sailed a route considered lower risk. But the ocean doesn't follow predictions, and war doesn't spare anyone. Somewhere in the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic, the Andrea Luckenbach simply vanished. No SOS message, no survivors, no eyewitnesses, no confirmed submarine attack. Nothing. It was as if the ship was lifted from the surface and erased from history. Families waited weeks for news. Sailors' wives held on to fading hope. Mothers prayed their sons were drifting on lifeboats. But as time passed, silence became the only answer they received. Even stranger government officials avoided every question. Reports were sealed. Naval statements were vague. No details were released, not even the ship's exact last known position. Why? Was the ship torpedoed by a German U-boat? Did an onboard explosion tear her apart? Was she carrying secret cargo the government didn't want exposed? Or was she lost because of something far more catastrophic? Something the world wasn't ready to hear. The sinking of the Andrea Luckenbach didn't just claim the lives of the crew. It created a mystery that would haunt the Atlantic for more than a century, a mystery buried under wartime secrecy and lost somewhere beneath thousands of feet of freezing, silent water. This wasn't just another wartime tragedy. This was the disappearance of a ship that shouldn't have sunk, a ship built to survive, yet swallowed whole without leaving a single clue. And the deeper we go into this story, the stranger it becomes. When the SS Andrea Luckenbach disappeared in 1917, the world was already drowning in the chaos of World War I, but to understand why her disappearance mattered so deeply, and why the truth behind it was buried, we need to go back to the moment America stepped into the conflict. For almost 3 years, the United States tried to stay out of the war. Europe was tearing itself apart, trenches stretching for miles, artillery turning cities into dust, millions of soldiers dying for inches of ground. President Woodrow Wilson insisted America would remain neutral, a distant observer, a nation untouched by the madness across the Atlantic. But the ocean had other plans. German U-boats were turning the Atlantic into a battlefield. They sank merchant ships, passenger liners, neutral vessels, anything that carried supplies to Allied nations. Their message was simple: if it floats, it's a target. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 shocked the world, but it wasn't enough to pull America into war. The final push came in 1917, when Germany announced unrestricted submarine warfare, promising to attack any ship heading toward Britain, France, or their allies. This included American ships, American cargo, American lives. Suddenly, neutrality was no longer an option. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, instantly transforming its economy, military, and merchant fleet. Factories shifted from making consumer goods to manufacturing weapons, ammunition, and essential supplies. And shipping companies, like the Luckenbach Steamship Company, became part of a massive wartime lifeline. The US military needed fuel. Europe needed food. The Allies needed ammunition, supplies, and steel. And this demand turned ordinary cargo ships into high-value wartime assets. The Andrea Luckenbach became one of these crucial vessels. But with this new responsibility came danger. German U-boats, now considered American ships legitimate targets. The waters they sailed through from the US East Coast to the war zones near Britain were patrolled by submarines so stealthy that many merchant captains never saw the attack coming. In 1917 alone, Germany sank over 3,000 Allied and neutral ships. The ocean became a graveyard of twisted metal and broken wood. Merchant sailors knew the risks. They were not soldiers, yet they fought the war just as bravely, without weapons, without training, armed with nothing but courage and hope. The Andrea Luckenbach's crew was no different. They boarded the ship, knowing that any voyage could be their last. They sailed through waters where death struck from beneath the surface without warning. Every ripple, every shadow below the waves could be a submarine preparing to attack. So when the Andrea Luckenbach vanished without a trace, the world assumed it was just another casualty of the U-boat campaign. But as we look deeper, a disturbing truth emerges. The US government never confirmed a submarine attack. Germany never claimed responsibility. Survivors never washed ashore. Debris never surfaced. In a year when thousands of ships were sunk, the Andrea Luckenbach remains one of the few whose fate was never explained, not publicly, and perhaps not privately either. Her disappearance wasn't just a wartime tragedy. It was a crack in the official narrative, a mystery that didn't fit neatly into the chaos of submarine warfare. And the more we uncover, the more questions we find. Long before the SS Andrea Luckenbach vanished into wartime waters, the ship carried a name that meant something. A name tied to one of America's most ambitious shipping dynasties. To understand why her disappearance mattered so deeply, we must return to the origins of a company that helped shape American maritime history. The Luckenbach Steamship Company. In the late 1800s, as America expanded its coastlines, cities, and industries, a German immigrant named Louis Luckenbach saw an opportunity. While most people chased land and gold, Luckenbach went after something else: the ocean. He started with a single tugboat in New York Harbor. Not glamorous, not powerful, just a small vessel towing barges through crowded waterways for a few coins per job. But Luckenbach was sharp, ambitious, relentless. Every time he earned money, he bought more boats. Every vessel, no matter how small, was repaired, strengthened, and pushed into service. By the turn of the century, his tugboat business had evolved into a full-fledged steamship empire. The company became famous, not for luxury, but for reliability. Luckenbach ships delivered everything cold steel, food, machinery up and down the East Coast and across the Atlantic. They were strong, steady, and built to survive the toughest voyages. This was the world the Andrea Luckenbach was born into. Launched in the early 1900s, she wasn't built to be beautiful. She was built to work. With a reinforced steel hull, powerful cargo holds, and a dependable engine crew, she quickly became one of the company's most trusted vessels. Sailors described her as a ship that handled storms like a mountain, a vessel that felt alive like she wanted to stay afloat. The kind of ship captains fought to command. During peacetime, she transported coal, textiles, machinery, and industrial goods, helping fuel America's rapid growth. But everything changed in 1917. When the United States entered World War I, the Luckenbach fleet was immediately absorbed into the war effort. Der Strung. Dependable cargo ships suddenly became vital, assets hauling military equipment, food, ammunition, and supplies to support the Allies in Europe. The company's slogan shifted from commercial pride to patriotic duty. The Andrea Luckenbach, once just another steamship, became part of a lifeline across the Atlantic. But wartime also brought risks the company had never faced before. Their ships were hunted by German U-boat. Convoys were attacked. Some Luckenbach vessels were sunk, others barely survived. Families of crew members lived in constant fear, watching for telegrams that too often delivered heartbreak instead of news. Yet through all of this, the Andrea Luckenbach developed a reputation within the fleet as the survivor. She had crossed dangerous waters multiple times. She had outrun storms. She had outlasted mechanical failures. She had never failed a mission. Sailors believed she was one of the few ships that would make it through the war unharmed. That belief made her disappearance even more shocking. How could such a reliable vessel vanish without warning? How could a ship with such a strong legacy leave behind no survivors, no wreckage, no explanation? The company that once celebrated her reliability was now faced with silence, a silence that felt heavier than the loss itself. And as we move closer to a final voyage, the questions only grow darker. On a cold morning in late 1917, the SS Andrea Luckenbach prepared for what should have been a routine wartime voyage. A crossing she had completed many times before, but for the 30 crew members climbing aboard that day, nothing felt routine. War had changed everything. The harbor was tense. Soldiers marched, officials whispered, and the docks were crowded not with families saying goodbye, but with armed guards watching for spies. Merchant ships had become military targets, and everyone knew it. Still, the Andrea Luckenbach stood tall. Her steel hull, blackened by years of coal smoke, glistened faintly under the winter sun. Her engines throbbed with familiar strength. To the men who had sailed her for years, she felt like a fortress, solid, dependable, unshakable. The cargo she carried was essential, wartime supplies America needed to send across the Atlantic to support the Allies. Crates of machinery, boxers of medical gear, food, ammunition, though this was never officially confirmed. In wartime, secrecy became a safety measure. Even the crew didn't know everything that was stored in the lower holds. But there was one thing they all understood. This voyage was dangerous. German U-boats had been spotted in the region. Convoys were recommended, but escorts were in short supply. Merchant ships often sailed alone, hoping the ocean's vastness would hide them. The Andrea Luckenbach, heavy with cargo, pulled away from the dock and into open waters. The captain, a seasoned sailor known for his calm demeanor, kept the mission straightforward. Follow the safe route, stay radio silent unless necessary, and avoid known U-boat zones. The crew settled into their routines, maintaining engines, checking cargo lines, scanning the horizon. But beneath their confidence, Everyone carried an unspoken fear. Every shadow on the water could be a periscope. Every sudden vibration could mean a torpedo. Every night watch felt like staring into a black void filled with unseen dangers. As the ship pushed further into the Atlantic, the ocean grew wilder. Waves slammed against the hull. Winds howled across the deck. But the Andrea Luckenbach handled it well, just as she always had. The crew joked, laughed, played cards during breaks. They trusted their ship. They trusted their captain. They believed they would make it home again. But one detail made this voyage different from the others. There would be no survivors to tell what happened next. No one would describe that last sunset. No one would explain if they were attacked, ambushed, or betrayed by the sea. Somewhere ahead, somewhere in the cold, dark waters they were slowly approaching. A fate awaited them that no one had predicted. A fate so sudden and silent that even the strongest ship in the Luckenbach fleet could not escape it. As the Andrea Luckenbach continued into the open Atlantic, her crew unaware of the danger closing in, history itself held its breath, because this voyage would be her last. As the SS Andrea Luckenbach pushed deeper into the vast Atlantic, the world around her grew quieter. The coastline had disappeared days ago. No other ships crossed her path. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Cold, dark, and unsettlingly calm. It was here, in these isolated waters, that the real danger began. Throughout 1917, this region had earned a chilling reputation. Allied sailors whispered about it in taverns and dockyards, the hunting grounds. A stretch of sea where German U-boats waited patiently like wolves beneath the surface. The Andrea Luckenbach was entering that zone now. The crew knew it, even if no one spoke it aloud. Every man could feel the shift, the air thicker, the silence heavier. The horizon strangely empty. Merchant ships were supposed to find comfort in numbers. But this voyage was different. Because of a shortage of escorts, the Andrea had been forced to sail alone. Inside the radio room, an operator sat by the receiver, listening to bursts of static mixed with faint reports from distant ships. Some were routine, others were warnings. A British cargo vessel torpedoed 2 days earlier. A Norwegian steamer sunk without a distress call. American tankers forced to turn back. Every new report hinted at the same truth. U-boats were getting closer. But Andrea Luckenbach pressed on. On Tay Bridge, the captain scanned the waters through binoculars. Nothing unusual. No wakes, no periscopes, no shadows. Yet something bothered him. A feeling he couldn't explain. His instincts were rarely wrong. Below deck, engineers worked tirelessly in the sweltering heat of the engine room. Cold dust clung to their skin as they fed the hungry boilers. Every throb of the engines echoed through the hull, vibrating like a heartbeat in the silence. The crew moved cautiously now. Conversations grew shorter. Meals were eaten in silence. The laughter that had filled the ship early in the voyage was gone. They could sense something beneath them. Late one evening, as the sun disappeared behind storm clouds, a lookout reported something strange. A faint disturbance in the water. A ripple moving against the natural flow of the sea. It vanished in seconds. No one could confirm what he saw, but the message was clear. They were being watched. The Andrea Luckenbach maintained blackout conditions at night, extinguishing all lights to avoid detection. Only the faint glow of the compass illuminated the bridge. Every night watch felt eternal, every sound amplified by fear. Some crew members claimed they heard metallic noises below, like distant engines echoing from the deep. Others dismissed it as paranoia, but one thing was undeniable. The ocean did not feel empty anymore. Whether it was a U-boat stalking them silently, or something else entirely, no one knew. What they did know was this: ships didn't just vanish without reason. Something was out there, hiding beneath the waves, waiting for the perfect moment. And the Andrea was heading straight toward it. 4 days, the SS Andrea Luckenbach sailed under a sky heavy with clouds and tension. Whispers of danger floated through the crew like cold breath on the back of their necks. But nothing happened. No periscopes, no torpedoes, no alarms. And then in a single moment, no one ever witnessed, the ship was gone. It happened on a morning that seemed almost peaceful. The wind was steady, the waves calm enough for routine deck inspections. The crew moved through their duties with practiced familiarity. The captain reviewed the navigation charts and recorded the ship's position. As he always did, there was no indication none that this day would be the last in the Andrea Luckenbach's life. But beneath the waves, danger was silently rising. German U-boats were masters of patience. They stalked targets for hours, even days, slipping through the water like shadows. Sometimes they attacked immediately. Sometimes they waited for the perfect angle. And sometimes they didn't need to attack at all. The ocean itself became the weapon. When the Andrea Luckenbach missed her scheduled radio report, operators on land assumed bad weather had interfered. Storms often disrupted communication, but as the hours passed, uneasiness grew. The ship did not reply. The ship did not correct course. The ship did not call for help, because by then, there was no ship left to call. No survivors ever reached shore. No distress signal was sent. No lifeboats were found drifting silently in the cold Atlantic. There was nothing. Not a plank of wood, not a crate of cargo. Not a single clue floating on the waves. Ships torpedoed during the war often left trails of wreckage debris, oil slicks, and yet, the Andrea Luckenbach vanished as if swallowed whole. Why? Historians have debated this for decades, and three major theories emerged. 1. A torpedo strike so precise it left no time to react. Some believe a German U-boat fired a single torpedo at the ship's magazine or boiler section, a place where one hit would trigger a massive internal explosion. If that happened, the Andrea Luckenbach could have broken in half, instantly, sunk within minutes, or even plunged straight down in a vertical drop. This would leave no survivors and little debris. 2. A drift mine from earlier battles. The North Atlantic was littered with naval mines. Silent killers drifting freely after storms snapped their chains. If the Andrea struck one, the explosion would be sudden, catastrophic, and nearly impossible to escape. 3. A deadly cargo explosion. Wartime secrecy meant that even the crew didn't always know it was stored in the lower holds. Some suspect the ship carried explosive goods, ammunition, or volatile chemicals. If they ignited, it would explain the total disappearance. But the most chilling detail is this. A nearby U-boat reported hearing a massive explosion around the same time. Yet the commander never claimed the kill, suggesting he didn't fire the shot. So what exploded that day? A torpedo. A mine. The ship itself? No one knows. What we do know is this. In the heart of the war's deadliest waters, the Andrea Luckenbach met a fate so swift, so silent, and so complete that even the ocean refused to return evidence. A ship built to survive anything was undone by something no one ever saw. When the SS Andrea Luckenbach failed to send her scheduled radio check-in, no one panicked at first. Wartime communication was unpredictable. Storms, signal interference, and equipment failures happened all the time. But as hours passed with no message, concern turned into fear, and fear into urgency. The U.S. Navy quickly issued an alert. Nearby merchant ships were contacted. Escort vessels were notified, but the ocean answered with silence. And then began the desperate search for survivors. Day 1, the alert convoy escorts, patrol boats, and even civilian ships were told to keep an eye out for lifeboats drifting men, oil slicks floating debris, anything. No matter how small, that might point to the Andrea Luckenbach's fate. The first search vessels reached her last known location by nightfall. They scanned the waters with lanterns and early searchlights, hoping to catch even the faintest reflection from a life jacket. But all they saw was darkness. The sea was calm, almost unnaturally quiet, as if whatever tragedy had occurred was swallowed instantly by the waves. Day 2, expanding the search grid. More ships joined the effort. Aircraft, still primitive in 1917, attempted to fly low over the water to look for debris fields. Dozens of miles around the Andrea's route were combed. Still nothing. Not a broken plank. Not a floating crate. Not a single scrap of wood or metal. Veteran sailors began whispering something unsettling. Ships don't disappear like this. not even in wartime. Even torpedoed ships left trails, scattered wreckage, bodies, or lifeboats. But the Andrea Luckenbach had left behind no trace at all. Day 3, the families begin to fear the worst back home. Families waited anxiously for the dreaded telegram. Mothers, wives, children, all praying for news, good or bad. Anything but silence. Some refused to believe the ship was lost. Others clung to fragile hope, imagining lifeboats drifting toward rescue. But the reality at sea was grim. Search crews reported no bodies, no clothing, no life preservers, no oil on the surface, no signs of fire or explosion. It was as if the ship had been lifted from the water and vanished into thin air. Day 4, the last sweep by the 4th day, the search area had widened into impossible distances. Currents could have carried survivors anywhere, yet still not a single clue appeared. A British destroyer captain wrote in his log, "It is as though the sea has eaten the ship whole." Finally, exhausted and almost out of coal, the search vessels began to withdraw. The official report was grim and short. No survivors found, no wreckage recovered. The hardest part, acceptance. For the families of the crew, the lack of physical evidence was torture. There were no bodies to mourn, no graves to visit, no certainty of what happened in the ship as if an minutus. The Andrea Luckenbach didn't just sink. She erased her own footprint, and with each passing day, one question grew louder. How does an entire ship vanish without leaving a single clue? As the search ended and hope faded, another mystery emerged, one that would reveal more than just tragedy. It would expose wartime secrets. It would raise suspicions, and it would lead to one of the most uncomfortable truths of the entire story. Sometimes the government knows more than it tells. When the SS Andrea Luckenbach vanished in 1917, the families of the 30 sailors expected answers from the US government. A detailed explanation. An investigation. A report that would bring closure, even if the truth was painful. Instead, they were met with something far worse than tragedy. Silence. Not a word from the Navy. Not a statement from the War Department. Not even a clear confirmation that the ship had been sunk. It was as if the Andrea Luckenbach had never existed. To understand why, we need to look at America's wartime communication strategy in 1917. The government had created a rigid system of censorship, arguing that any information about ship losses could help the enemy. If the public knew which routes were being targeted or which cargo ships had disappeared, Germany might adjust its submarine attacks accordingly. So, the moment a ship vanished, the information was often locked away. But with the Andrea Luckenbach, the silence felt deliberate, deeper than routine censorship. Documents that should have been public were classified. Maritime records showed gaps. Newspapers received strict instructions not to report details. And when journalists tried, the stories were quietly removed from print. The families were told only one sentence. Your loved one was lost in service of his country. But even that didn't sit right. Behind closed doors, government officials debated how to phrase the tragedy. One report referred to a suspected U-boat attack. Another document labeled the event as Incident Unknown, a Tier D. For most ships lost during World War I, the ocean eventually gave back something. A shattered lifeboat drifting ashore, a piece of hull washed up on a beach, or the wreck discovered decades later by divers or sonar scans. But the SS Andrea Luckenbach, nothing. Not a bolt, not a crate, not a single identifiable piece of metal. She became one of the few wartime ships that simply vanished, swallowed by the Atlantic without leaving behind a trace. And that single fact turned the Andrea from a tragedy into a century-old mystery. In the years after the ship's disappearance, oceanographers, naval historians, and even amateur divers tried to piece together her final resting place. But finding a wreck in the open Atlantic is like searching for a stone in an endless desert, with storms constantly reshaping the seafloor. The first major challenge was uncertainty. The Andrea's exact route was classified. Her cargo manifest was sealed. Her final radio position was never recorded. Even modern researchers were left with only a rough estimate of where she might have been, a vague patch of ocean stretching hundreds of miles. That isn't a search zone. That's a graveyard. In the early 2000s, New deep-sea scanning technologies sparked fresh hope. Remotely operated vehicles or OVs and multi-beam sonar could now detect shipwrecks resting miles below. Teams mapped areas where U-boats were active in 1917. Hoping to match wrecks with lost ships, they found dozens. Each time a wreck appeared on sonar, experts examined the hull shape, engine design, and cargo layout. But none matched the Andrea Luckenbach. Her steel, her design, her engine signature. Nothing surfaced. Some experts began to believe the Andrea had been destroyed by such a massive explosion that the ship literally broke apart and scattered across the ocean floor in fragments, too small to identify. A torpedo hitting the boiler, or a mine detonating beneath the hull, could create exactly that effect. Others argued she sank intact, but slid into one of the deepest trenches in that region. A place so remote that even today as technology struggles to reach it. And then there were the conspiracy theorists. If the Andrea was carrying secret wartime cargo weapons, volatile chemicals, or materials the government didn't want exposed, would the truth have been intentionally buried? Would the wreck's location have been hidden to prevent other nations from discovering what she carried? There is no proof. There is no proof, but the silence from official records only deepens the mystery. Today, the Andrea Luckenbach remains one of the lost ghosts of the Atlantic. Scientists know roughly where she went down, but the exact spot remains untouched, unseen, and unknown. Beneath thousands of feet of freezing black water, she waits her steel, slowly dissolving. A story trapped in the darkness, where even sunken ships rarely speak. And for the families, historians, and maritime enthusiasts who still seek answers, the question lingers: how does a ship so strong, a ship so trusted, a ship so needed, simply vanish forever? It's a question the ocean refuses to answer. For more than a century, the SS Andrea Luckenbach has remained hidden somewhere beneath the vast, unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. No wreck discovered, no answers confirmed, no closure granted. But even without a visible grave, the ship has never truly disappeared. It lives on, not in photographs or artifacts, but in the questions it refused to answer. Questions that echo like whispers rising from the ocean floor. What really happened out there? Was it a torpedo from a silent U-boat, stalking the ship for days? Was it a drifting mine waiting patiently for its victim? Or was it something far more explosive, hidden deep in the cargo hold? A danger the government never admitted to carrying. The ocean keeps its secrets, but the memories of those lost refuse to fade. For the families of the crew, the Andrea Luckenbach was more than steel and cargo. It was a father who promised to return, a son who wanted to earn an honest living, a brother writing letters from the sea, a husband whose ring still rested on a nightstand waiting for one more knock at the door. They waited weeks, then months, hoping for a message in a bottle, a survivor floating on wreckage, even a personal item washing ashore. None came. Instead, the families received the same line repeated in different forms. Lost at sea, no further details available. A single sentence to summarize dozens of lives. The silence was cruel, but intentional, because the truth was buried under layers of wartime secrecy. When the war ended, nations celebrated victory. Governments wrote books, erected statues, and honored soldiers. But the merchant sailors, the men who kept food, medicine, and supplies flowing across deadly waters, were often forgotten. The Andrea Luckenbach became one of thousands of unrecorded casualties, lost not only to the ocean but to memory. Decades passed. Ships evolved from steam to steel giants. Navigation went from celestial stars to satellites. Submarines became quieter, deeper, deadlier. But the Andrea remained where she fell, somewhere in a cold, dark layer of the Atlantic, untouched by sunlight, preserved by silence. Historians searched, oceanographers scanned. Private teams mapped possible wreck sites. They found scattered pieces of other ships, but never hers. Some say she lies too deep. Some say the wreck broke apart and scattered beyond recognition. Others believe the coordinates recorded were wrong from the beginning. But one truth remains. She is out there, and in that final resting place, Among shifting sands and silent currents lies a story that still feels unfinished. Today, the Andrea Luckenbach is more than a lost ship. She is a symbol of wartime sacrifice, hidden behind censorship, a reminder of how quickly human lives can disappear into history, and a warning of how Israeli truth can be buried beneath the tides of conflict. As long as the wreck remains undiscovered, the mystery breathes on, drifting through generations, carried on waves, whispered by winds, remembered by the deep itself, because some ships don't just sink, they become ghosts, forever moving in the darkest corners of the ocean, waiting for the day their story finally rises to the surface.